Before we get started, let me just take a quick second to answer probably the most important question that everybody's probably going to ask today, and that is, do we have Wi-Fi? We do. The network and the password is right there on the screen, but it's also inside the program that you guys received at registration. So you have that for your laptops, you have that for your mobile devices, so you should be good to go. What I want to talk about now is probably the most exciting part of today is that everybody in this room has a chance to get a $25 gift card from Amazon. All you have to do is visit, we have 17 vendors out in the hall. You have to visit 15 of them. 15 out of the 17 and get your badge scanned, and you will receive an email with a $25 gift card from Amazon. So make sure that everybody is visiting the vendors out there today and the sponsors, and it's going to be emailed right to you. It's just that easy. Let me tell you a little bit about WIT if some of you don't know who we are. We are a full-service solutions IT provider. We offer data and automation solutions. We also offer resource solutions. On the data and automation side, we offer data visualization, data management, data strategy, data science, and intelligent automation. On the resource solution side, we offer cloud services, application development, infrastructure, data warehouse, and full lifecycle. If you'd like to learn more how we can be of service to you and your organization, we do have a booth out in front, the first one, the WIT booth. Stop by there. We'll be able to talk to you a little bit more about some of the services that we do provide, or otherwise, somebody's waving back there, or otherwise visit any one of us who are wearing the blue shirts walking around today, and we'll be able to give you more information about all of our services. The most important thing we want to do right now is thank you to our sponsors. Without you, we would not be able to have this event. So please make sure that you're visiting all the sponsors that are out in the hallway. Again, you have that opportunity to get that $25 gift card from Amazon. It's definitely make it worth your while. And as you see, we have a diverse group of companies that are out there. So please make sure that you are visiting all of the sponsors today. So what's our agenda today? Well, first of all, we have our opening keynote this morning. He is a cloud strategist for AWS. He will be up here momentarily. We have 5 parallel tracks, including topics that are transformation leadership, process automation, analytics, cloud, and data management. We'll be closing the summit at the end of the program with a tri-county panel moderated by Chad Livengood with the Cranes Detroit business. So stick around for that. We have the 3 CIOs from Oakland, Wayne, and Macomb County doing a panel discussion, so that should be pretty exciting. And of course, networking and vendor booths. So that's our agenda for the summit today. Uh-oh. A couple housekeeping items. Please keep your cell phone silent. Coat check is right across the hall. The restrooms are also across the hall and over by registration, across from registration down the hall as well. We talked about visiting the sponsors for their raffle to be entered in various raffles. Actually, each sponsor may be having their own raffle, so you might be able to get enrolled in that raffle as well. The data management track 5 room is a little tricky if you haven't been here before. All the different tracks are here along the main hallway here, but the Mediterranean room is over across from registration down the hall on the right. So it's kind of off the beaten path a little bit, but if you ask one of us, we'll be able to direct you the right way if you get turned around. And of course, if you need help, just look for the blue shirts. We're here to help you. We talked a little bit about the gifts and the raffles. We're going to have a video feedback in the afternoon where you have an opportunity to tell a little bit about your experience here at the summit today. You would be awarded a Starbucks gift card for that. We also have a survey raffle for Amazon gift card at the end of the summit. And of course, various sponsors will have their own raffles, so make sure that you visit their booths. You do have to be here to win, so don't try to sneak out on us, all right? Just a reminder that we have a Save the Date coming in March 12th of 2020 right here at the Marriott. is our Great Lakes Data and Analytics Summit. So mark your calendars. We're going to be right back here come March to host that event as well. So you'll get more information as we get closer to that event. Now, what you've been waiting for. It is my pleasure to introduce to you our keynote for this morning. He is the Enterprise Cloud Strategist for AWS. So everybody, please give a warm welcome to Mr. Joe Chung.
Distinct pleasure to be here with you all. I actually grew up in the great state of Michigan, born and raised. Grew up in Sterling Heights, where I lived from kindergarten through high school and went to Michigan. And then for the last, 20 years, I've been in Chicago, but I'll always be proud to be able to show people where I live using my hand. So isn't that kind of what most people do? In my role as enterprise strategist, if you're just curious about what that title is, basically what we have is a pretty small team of individuals who are former CIOs and CTOs. We've all had the experience of driving a cloud transformation, digital transformation onto the AWS platform. Prior to joining AWS about 3 years ago, I was with Accenture for over 20 years. I was a managing director in the organization. But the last role I had before joining AWS is for Accenture's internal technology organization, our IT organization. I was their chief architect and group technology officer. That organization had the ambition to be over 90% in the cloud, to drink our own champagne. I don't like using that term, eating your own dog food. I don't know anybody who likes to eat dog food. And that organization has since completed that journey, where over 95% of their on-prem workloads now run in the cloud. I also helped drive a DevOps and Agile transformation and starting to adopt new technologies around cloud native and serverless, and then kind of rounded out, also had the opportunity to blow up the way we thought about data and business intelligence, because I was just tired of business stakeholders yelling at me about how horrible reporting was in our organization. So for those of you who own BI systems, I have a soft spot in my heart for you. It's a pretty tough space to work in. And every day, every week, in fact, last week I was in South Korea, I have the opportunity to kind of hear from our customers what their ambitions are. I can tell you across the board, everybody is trying to figure this thing called digital out, even though we've been talking about it for what seems like forever, and maybe for some of you, you're tired of hearing it. But I can say that is definitely a C-suite agenda item. And one of the hallmarks of a digital transformation is really around innovation and increasing the agility. So what I'd like to share with you today are some thoughts around how Amazon thinks about innovation. And I'll caveat it by saying that this is certainly not the right way. It's not the only way. There are many forms of innovation. And the other thing that I'll say is that when I joined AWS and Amazon, one of the primary motivations for me to join the organization was to really try to unpack how Amazon works. So as a customer, both in terms of the AWS cloud as well as a retail customer, I was always fascinated by how an organization like this, this kind of very strange and peculiar organization, could crank out the number of innovations that it does. And I'm happy to report that after 3 years, I don't know if I've got this all figured out, but I think there are a few key principles and tenets that hopefully you can kind of learn and take away from. I'll also try to finish a little bit early so that if you have any questions, I can answer them for you and maybe for the benefit of the whole group. And certainly I'll be sticking around for a little bit. So if you have any further questions, be welcome to have that one-on-one conversation. So the first place to start with Amazon and the way we think about innovation is our mission statement. So contrary to what you might have assumed, our mission statement isn't to be the world's largest retailer. It's actually to be Earth's most customer-centric company. It's a mission statement that Jeff Bezos established from the very earliest days of Amazon in the mid-90s. And the observation to make here is that, gosh, it's not really constrained to any particular industry, any particular business. It's a pretty open-ended mission statement. And what I find sometimes is that a lot of what happens in particularly maybe sometimes older organizations, is that in people's heads, they sort of constrain themselves mentally. What can I do? Is it okay for me to pursue these ideas? And one thought is that, as you are leaders of your organizations, what kinds of things may potentially constrain or perhaps unconstrain the thinking in your organization? And certainly there are many examples of how Amazon has kind of taken this to heart. Everything from its earliest days as a book seller to being able to launch into digital books through the Kindle, to AWS, and to most recently the Amazon Go store. So I don't know, how many of you guys have heard of Amazon Go? Anybody? Okay, a fair number of you. For those of you that haven't, basically it's a new convenience store concept. There is one in our building in Chicago and rapidly expanding throughout the country. Basically the idea is you take your smartphone, you launch the app. I think even now you can just use the Amazon app. You scan the QR code, you walk into the convenience store through the turnstiles, and then you just grab whatever you want. You can stick it into the orange bags that they supply. You can stick it into your backpack. You can stick it into your purse and your pocket. And whatever you've grabbed, you just walk out. There's no checkout. You just walk back out the turnstiles, and a few minutes later, you'll get a notification with your bill. It is a weird experience. If you've ever tried it for the first time, it feels like you're literally stealing. You want to wave to somebody, is this okay for me to walk out? I mean, literally in the beginning, they had people that were like, it's okay, you can walk out. You're going to get charged. And here we have a combination of cameras and sensors. There are actually from what I understand, RFID chips in the packages themselves. So it is kind of like magic when you experience that. And that just kind of shows some of the hallmarks of what innovative companies do is they launch new products and services, even maybe in areas that don't often make sense, and probably the most famous example of that is AWS itself, which we'll talk a little bit more about. I mentioned that there are many different forms of innovation. Some organizations invest heavily in research and development, in labs. If there's anything to take away from learning about Amazon and how we think about innovation, it's really with this statement, that for us, innovation starts with your needs, and then working backwards from those needs. And why is that? This quote from Jeff, I think, summarizes it the best, and he says, there are many advantages to a customer-centric approach. But here's the big one. Customers are always beautifully, wonderfully dissatisfied. So any of you who've been in the customer service business, you know this to be an absolutely true statement. And even when they report being happy and business is great, even when they don't know it, customers want something better. And your desire to delight customers will drive you to invent on their behalf. In my home, I was the one to introduce the Echo Show, or the Echo set of devices. And in the beginning, it was kind of a party trick, right? My kids asking it jokes and telling it to, fart and things of that nature. But the interesting thing that happened was, and conversational AI, I think we're starting to see become more prominent in our daily lives, was when my wife discovered that she could manage our household to-do list and our shopping list. And because she could never find where her phone is, even though it's like right in front of her in the kitchen or other places, she just got used to this idea that she could just call things out. And what a wonderful innovation. We have 3 kids, very busy lifestyle, and the last thing you want to do is try to track down your Post-it note of your grocery list. The interesting thing that happened was she was like, it's really super annoying to keep calling out the wake word. And she was asking me, hey, can you talk to the Alexa team and tell them it's super annoying to keep saying Alexa? And so, of course, over time, that's something that has been addressed. And in fact, I think we have now 8 Echo devices in our home. We have one in every one of our kids' bedrooms and all the major parts of the house. And if anything, just not have my kids ask me what the weather is going to be was reason enough in and of itself. But just a few examples of how, even something innovative as conversational AI, it's really hard to get right in the beginning. And there's always going to be something that people want because this kind of innovation and this learning compounds. So a few ways to think about how we organize for innovation. These 4 pillars, it's always tough to try to describe these things in sort of a linear way because really, they really interplay with one another, but I'll try to do my best. And the first area to start is culture. So if you talk to some of the longest time Amazonians, in fact, I just was in a meeting with a gentleman by the name of Charlie Bell. He's been with Amazon for over 20 years, worked directly with Jeff in the Amazon.com days, and essentially is the working CTO for AWS. And he said, if there's anything that really drives innovation at Amazon, it's our culture. And I like this quote. It's a little bit long and it's a little bit wordy, but I think it captures why we focus on culture so much. And it's this quote from Harrington Emerson: "As to methods, there may be a million and then some, but principles are few. The man who grasps principles can successfully select his own methods. The man who tries methods ignoring principles is sure to have trouble." It's simply the idea that, you can create a bunch of rules of how humans should interact with each other, but sometimes a simple statement like the golden rule of do unto others as you would like to have done unto yourself can capture all the different aspects of behavior without having to write all these rules. And so at Amazon, we have 14 leadership principles. I know it's a lot. Everything from customer obsession and ownership to delivering results. And the reason why we focus so much on these leadership principles is in the beginning days of Amazon, as the organization was starting to grow and hire, and I think we have over 640-some thousand employees right now and growing. The challenge, of course, is how do you preserve that day one culture? How do you preserve that startup mentality? In fact, how do you make every employee behave like Jeff Bezos or some of the earliest members of the leadership team? That sense of urgency, that sense that you want to try to invent on behalf of customers. And what the team realized they needed to do to sort of drive that set of behaviors through the organization, not writing a big rule book, not trying to generate a bunch of policies, is to focus on these 14 leadership principles. Everything from learning and being curious to inventing and simplifying. A few other observations in this area. This is how we hire. So the vast majority of our interview process is actually focused on whether people demonstrate these aspects of 14 leadership principles. So while yes, having the experience and the skill set is really important, what's arguably more important to us is your ability to demonstrate these leadership behaviors. It's the language we use to make decisions. Should we be customer obsessed? Should we release this feature that might actually destroy our revenues? But because we believe it's in the interests of our customers, that's what we should do, maybe we should do it. Or bias for action. Let's do it now. And we'll talk a little bit some of ways that we try to encourage employees to make decisions quickly without having to consult a lot of individuals. And it's how we measure performance. So like many organizations, we have performance management systems, but our performance management systems are all anchored around probing into these areas. And so we have a 360-degree feedback system where people that we work with, that we work for, or our peers and colleagues can all comment on these 14 leadership principles. Under Invent and Simplify, there's this notion of being and willing to be misunderstood for a very long period of time. The first example, how many people own the very first generation Kindle? Maybe some. Just to let you know, the press release, the idea around the Kindle was a book anywhere, any part of the world, delivered in under 60 seconds. That's what the goal of the Kindle was. But when we launched it, people thought, that is crazy. You sell these things called books. Why would you go and release a product that would cannibalize your sales? But that's just part of the ethos of what we try to do on a daily basis and actually try to encourage every employee to behave in a similar way. And we mentioned AWS. I love this from Business Week back in 2006. Amazon's risky bet. CEO Jeff Bezos wants to run your business with his web technology. Wall Street wishes he would just mind the store. And AWS was something that was born out of a need that we had internally within Amazon to be able to quickly service customers and needs. But then we also realized that that's something that you all especially those of you who've worked in infrastructure and IT know it can be really hard to manage infrastructure. And since then, there are many customers. We have millions of customers, some of the world's largest customers and corporations using AWS on a daily basis. But is it enough to have these leadership principles, these kind of cultural elements? And sometimes we like to use this thing called a mental model. A mental model is a way to kind of help illustrate and give life to these leadership principles. And one mental model that we like to use a lot is this concept of one-way and two-way doors. And the idea is this, is that some types of decisions are really one-way doors. So when you walk into that room, it can be very difficult to unwind that. Launching a business like AWS took a lot of consideration, some investment, pretty difficult to unwind. But what we found is that most decisions day to day within our company, and arguably perhaps in most companies, are actually two-way door decisions. And what does that mean? It means that when you walk in that door and you make that decision, this wasn't right, and then I just walk back out the door. And the reason why we focus on this is that oftentimes in organizations, every decision is treated as a one-way door decision. And because of that, what do? You schedule a lot of meetings. You build consensus. You ask a lot of people, is this something that should be done? And one of the things we try to do is actually discourage that behavior. If it's a two-way door decision, just make it. In fact, a longtime Amazonian manager will have this kind of a reaction. If someone said, hey, can I go do this? One of their employees, and they say, well, is this a two-way door decision? And they're like, yeah, if I think about it, sure. The reaction should be, then why are you even talking to me? Just go do it. This notion of bias for action. In fact, I don't think giving anything away in secret, but one of the questions sometimes we ask potential employees is, when's the last time you just made a decision without telling anybody? Because that's the kind of behavior. And the reason is that there's so much customer need out there. There's so many ways in which we need to help our customers, and oftentimes taking a lot of time to try to figure out whether I should do something is detrimental to being able to be customer obsessed. The second area to talk about is this notion of mechanisms. Mechanisms is a little bit of a difficult concept sometimes, but the idea of mechanism that I like, you can think of it as a process, but I think it was best put by Jeff when he said that mechanisms are a way to turn good intentions into action. So because I talk to a lot of companies and I try to understand what is their vision, what are they trying to do, oftentimes they'll say, I want to be more agile. I want to be more innovative. They may even say, I want to be cloud first. But when you kind of double click into that statement and you ask, well, what are you doing to help your company be more innovative? It sort of falls apart. And the question, of course, is then, if your desire is to be more innovative, if your desire is to be more customer obsessed or more customer centric, how are you actually enabling employees, the people in your organization, to follow through? A great example of that was with being a leader in Amazon at a certain level, you have to listen to customer service calls as a mechanism to try to stay close to the voice of customers, we like to call it. And Jeff Bezos was sitting next to a customer service rep, a CSR, and the CSR received a call, and there was a table that was being returned by a customer. And before the customer could even say what reason it was that the table was being returned, she leaned over to Jeff and whispered in his ear, it's because there's a scratch in the upper right corner. And then she asked, why are you returning this table? And the person said, there's a scratch in the upper right corner. So of course, Jeff was completely surprised. He was like, are you some type of fortune teller? How did you know that? And it was like, oh, these tables get returned all the time. They all have scratches in the upper right-hand corner. And so of course, Jeff was furious. He was like, this is unacceptable. We're supposed to be customer obsessed. And what did he do? He scheduled a bunch of meetings and said, this is unacceptable. What are we going to do about it? And what he realized is that that is not a mechanism. That is not a scalable way in which you can be customer obsessed. How about we give the CSRs the tools so that they can follow through on that customer obsession? And so, in fact, one of the things he developed was the concept of an and-on cord. So Many of you, assuming you work in manufacturing or some related to that, know an and-on cord is a cord you can pull on the assembly line to completely stop it anytime there's a defect. And so every CSR in Amazon, if they see something like that, can immediately yank any product off the catalog without question, without having to consult anybody. So what do we do for innovation? At Amazon, if you ask any Amazonian, if you have a new product, an idea, a new service, a new feature request, how do you act on that? And every single person will say, you need to leverage the working backwards process. And the idea is this. Before you go and write a single line of code, before you go and develop a prototype, you need to go through this process of creating a press release. And this press release starts with answering these 5 very important must-have questions. 1, who is the customer? 2, what's the opportunity or benefit? 3, is the most important benefit clear? 4, I love this one, how do you actually know customers want that? And 5, what does the customer experience look like? The reason why I love number 4 is one of the things that our team likes to talk about is Hippo-based decision-making. Hippo-based decision-making basically is highest paid person's opinion, right? So how many times have you launched on some flagship project because so-and-so said this is something they believe needs to be done, when everybody in the organization is thinking, gosh, no one wants that. Just a few examples, and by going through this process, it really does kind of filter out a lot of the noise. There are millions of ideas out there in every organization. The challenge, of course, is how do you actually know which ideas to go launch and work on? And by answering these 5 questions, which I've done probably a half dozen times with different ideas that I've had, not just products and services, programs that we're trying to launch. It doesn't have to be just anything that we launch publicly. It's actually really hard just to even answer the question, who is your customer? Is it the student in the dorm room who has maybe a disability? Is it the parent who is working all the time and can't get home and can't, let's say, let the package into the door? After answering those 5 questions, we generate a 1-page press release. So going back to the Kindle example, announcing, back whenever the Kindle was being launched, the ability to read a book anywhere, anytime in the world in under 60 seconds. It has to be that crisp, it has to be that understood, because I've had the experience of sharing a press release with colleagues and they're like, Joe, I really don't get it. I don't understand what you're trying to do here. There's a set of frequently asked questions, which we'll show some examples of, and some visuals, just to kind of highlight what it is that you're trying to do. So the frequently asked questions, some sample ones, they're basically broken down into 2 categories. There's the customer frequently asked questions, and then there are the internal ones. The customer ones are relatively obvious. What's it going to cost? Where do I go to get this? The internal ones are the ones that tend to be a little bit more challenging. These are questions that your colleagues or your managers might ask of you. Are we going to make money? When are we going to make money? What's the market opportunity? Some of the frequently asked questions, by the way, there is no cap on the frequently asked questions section. So I've seen some press release documents that are 50, 60 pages. They're essentially business plans at the end of the day. What other options did we consider? And this other term, I don't know if you've ever heard the term MLP. So we don't like to use MVP, minimal viable product, at Amazon. We like to use MLP. So we replace the V with an L, and the L stands for lovable. So what's the minimal lovable product, not just minimal viable product? And then finally, a set of visuals that match the fidelity and the maturity of your idea. So I don't know if you've ever had this experience. I've developed plenty of prototypes in my 20-plus year career. And sometimes the danger is you can go too hi-fi too fast. And what happens? I remember I was in with one of the leadership, the C-suite within an organization. I was showing them the prototype, and it looked like it was done. And what was the reaction? Why can't we just go live? It looks done to me. And it's like, no. This is like all just like duct tape and string in the background. They're like, I don't get it. Let's just go live. And so that's the danger if you go too high fidelity too soon. So what does the process look like once you actually create this document, this artifact? So the way we run meetings and the way we make any decision at Amazon is we do not use PowerPoints. So we use PowerPoints in sessions like this, but every decision is made with reading a document. So if it's reviewing a business case, or in this particular case, a press release, you sit down, and the way it looks is about for 20 or 30 minutes, it's complete silence. We do typically print them out, so we do kill a fair number of trees. I assume all that paper is recycled. But we pass it out, and then for 20 and 30 minutes, you just read in silence. And then for the rest of the time, you debate, you discuss. And why do we do it this way? And what works, and the way it works for us is that the problem with PowerPoints that we've found is that PowerPoints are extremely light on information. And oftentimes, the information either sits in the notes that you can't see or sits in the person's head that you can't get at until you couple that PowerPoint document with that person. Oftentimes, you have to depend on the charisma, the political capital that person yields, the power that person yields, whereas these documents have to stand alone by themselves. In fact, many cases, the author is not even on the document, or it's in the very, very last appendices, and it's pretty rare that one person has actually written that document. It's a very high bandwidth way to transfer information. Think about how difficult it would be to socialize a document that is 50 pages long with charts and graphs, 10-point font. We like to use protocols like the Oxford comma, and no acronyms that you have to assume the audience knows nothing. So it's actually really hard to create these documents, but it's super, super efficient for decision makers to be able to make a decision. One of my first experiences with this was with Andy Jassy, who's the CEO and the leader who created AWS, and it literally worked that way. We sat down 20 minutes, it was complete silence. He asked his team, what questions do you have? He typically likes to go last because he doesn't want to bias and influence the opinions. And usually there's some zinger in there that you just missed. You're just like, gosh darn it, like I missed that. And that's how every decision is made. And we have not just these types of documents. We have what are called one-page narratives and six-page narratives, but they more or less all work the same way. The other component of what makes kind of Amazon work is the way we think about our architecture. And I use the term architecture pretty broadly. It's not just our technical architecture, but it's also our business and organizational architecture. So an interesting thing happened, and something that happens to many companies that grow very fast, is you accumulate a lot of technical debt. Things just in the throes of trying to grow the business, scar tissue accumulates. And it gets to a point where things just lock up. And basically that's what happened in the early 2000s with Amazon. Growing the retail business, we had many copies of those systems. In the throes of trying to meet the rapid and scaling growth of the company, we kind of got to a point where we hit a number of bottlenecks. One was a technical bottleneck. We started to hit a limit where even the largest IT providers couldn't actually support the scale and the throughput that we required. So the technology didn't even exist to be able to support the transaction volumes. Two, we started to see some organizational bottlenecks. You'd have to gather a room full of 30 people. You guys might know these as change control boards. Can I do this? No, you can't do that, because if you do that, you're going to disrupt this. So it took a lot of coordination to be able to make these decisions. And what the leadership team and Jeff realized is that, okay, this is not going to work. This is unacceptable. We have to be able to change without disruption. We have to be able to make decisions without consulting lots of other people. And so one of the things that happened was Jeff, in conjunction with some of his leaders, made a declaration that, listen, the way we architect our systems has to change. We have to break things up into individual services. We have to assume that those services will be consumed not just internally, potentially externally. And so over about a 3-year period, Amazon systems were decomposed into what we today would call microservices. So before, that term didn't exist. It was more of a service-oriented architecture. And what ended up happening in this move to decompose is a dramatic departure in the way systems were architected. This is actually a quite old picture. We like to call this the Death Star or the dandelion picture internally at Amazon. And what it is it's an architecturally generated diagram of Amazon circa 2009. Each one of those dots represents an individual service. Each one of those dots actually represents an individual team, of which there are many thousands of these independent services. So when I first heard the Amazon story back in 2010 at an architecture conference in Silicon Valley, hearing about this journey that Amazon went through to decompose into microservices and to move to AWS itself as a customer, there was a stat that just sort of rocked my world. And the stat was, in 2010, granted, Amazon was making a change to their systems at a rate of once every 11.6 seconds. And I just about fell out of my chair. I was like, how's that possible? I can barely get a release out in my environment in a week, yet alone, a day or a month. How is it that an organization can make a change every 11.6 seconds? Fast forward to today, Amazon is making a change every 1 to 2 seconds, at any given point in time. What does that mean in terms of the business? Because sometimes I find that this term microservices can get lost on people. So one story that was shared with me as the organization was going through this change was there was two gentlemen on a Friday decided, gosh, maybe we can change the way we organize the search results. They thought about it, they implemented it on Saturday, and then on Monday when the leadership team walked in, they said, what's going on? Did we run a promotion? Is this like some kind of weird holiday or something? Because sales had gone up dramatically. And what they found was these two gentlemen had this idea on a Saturday, didn't tell anybody about it, deployed it, and all of a sudden there was this crazy magical lift. And apparently there was story after story after story like that. It was also during this period that we realized that even though we got really good at shoveling servers into data centers, it wasn't enough. In fact, it was a meeting with Jeff that there was a project being proposed, and he basically said, why aren't we doing it? And basically the answer was, it's going to take 3 to 6 months to provision that infrastructure. And the person that I was talking to who was in the room when this happened said, there are very few times that actually Jeff has kind of blown his top, like in a kind of angry way. And he said it was one of the very few times that it was directed at him. And basically Jeff's reaction was, then you need to invent your way out of this. And because of that, that's how AWS was born, with this idea that why should we have to wait for infrastructure? Why can't it be something more like electricity where you can just turn it on and use it? And over a number of years, Amazon itself has actually transitioned onto the AWS platform and powers just about every aspect of the business today. And this notion that everything should be self-service. I shouldn't have to talk to a lot of people. I should be able to make these decisions, whether it's provisioning new infrastructure, whether it's launching a new feature, all without having to consult a lot of people. And this kind of gets to the last kind of pillar here, which is around the people. At Amazon, we like to hire builders. We don't hire bureaucrats. We don't hire admins. We hire people who try to roll up their sleeve and get things done. And that does not just extend to the software engineers, our sales individuals, our pre-sales engineers, and even folks like myself are expected to build. The other aspect that you might have heard famously is that the way we organize around these services that I described is we staff them against what we call two pizza teams. So two pizza teams, the idea is that you shouldn't have a team that can't be fed by more than 2 pizzas, which is about probably 10 people if you use like a Chicago deep dish pizza. And that's about the outer limit. And why? Because once you get a team, I've taken over teams that are 120 people, and what's the problem? You have lots of folks who push information around. You have lots of people who gather telemetry through status reports. It's very difficult to observe what's happening. It's very difficult to make decisions very quickly. The other idea is that whatever you build, you run. I know this has been popularized by terms like DevOps, But the reason why Amazon did it is there's no better way to improve the quality of particularly software than to wake up the engineer who deployed it. This idea that you can just throw things over the wall to ops and they'll just deal with it doesn't exist. And so you can imagine your motivation to release quality software goes up dramatically if you're the person who has to carry the pager. Experimentation and failure. I know a lot of people talk about failing fast. But I think there are different kinds of failure modes as well. In a shareholder letter not that long ago, about 4 years ago, Jeff wrote, failure and invention are inseparable twins. To invent, you have to experiment. If you know in advance that it's going to work, it's not an experiment. Jeff wants to make Amazon one of the best places to fail. There are a couple examples of that. Before the third-party marketplace was created, there was a thing called Z-Shops. We had an auction site to try to compete with eBay. It took 3 goes, basically, before the third-party marketplace, the reseller marketplace, got established, which is 50% or more of Amazon's revenue these days. And then there's, of course, the Fire Phone. Any folks out there bought the Fire Phone? Okay, so I don't feel so bad. It was not a good product. And contrary to popular belief, it wasn't, sometimes I've heard some colleagues say that, the Fire Phone team turned into, and that technology turned into the Echo team. Not quite true, but that team basically got disbanded and dispersed and got to work on other things. And I think not that long ago, Jeff said, because an investor and analyst asked him, gosh, what if you have another one of these Fire Phone debacles? And he's like, you know what? My hope is we have 10 more of those in the pipeline. So it's across these 4 areas: culture, our mechanisms, our technical architecture, and organization that really kind of culminate to create these things. This idea of democratizing innovation is really key to understanding how Amazon innovates. I asked one time, just to kind of share a couple stories as I close. One of the very senior leaders in Amazon, one of their chief of staffs, gosh, how many of these PRFAQs does this individual review on a week? He's like, I don't know, maybe 10 or 12. So you can imagine 10 to 12 that get surfaced up to the highest leadership levels. How many are actually existing in the system? By the way, I know no way to count how many of these are out there. In fact, I've heard that we don't want to even count. That is surfacing and bubbling up. 10 to 12 ideas that could be the next Echo, that could be the next concept of the Go store. And to kind of put a pin on what does this really mean when you see all of these things come into play is the story of Prime Now. So Prime Now is, I don't know if it exists in the Detroit market necessarily. It's something that's being rolled out throughout the country, is this idea of essentially 1-hour delivery. Being able to order something and have it delivered in an hour. So when the press release came out for Prime Now, it took 111 days from when that idea was inked and reviewed to launch in its first concept in New York. 111 calendar days. And you ask yourself, how in the world could something like that happen? And a lot of it has to do with what we just talked about. One, somebody came up with an idea that, gosh, people always want more convenience. They always want more speed. So why wouldn't we try to launch a product, and we're going to give some thought to that service of how that will be done, to, gosh, I don't have to worry about inventory management. I don't have to worry about orders. I don't have to worry about payments. I don't have to worry about billing, because all of the interfaces or APIs for those already exist, and I can just tap into them. And the only thing that I have to worry about is maybe constructing a new type of warehouse where I can stock some subset of items that are the most popular and the easiest to deliver. And that's the idea. Now, not everything operates and is delivered in 111 days. The Amazon Go store took about 3 years. Jeff loved the idea and the concept. The technology did not exist. And of course, it took a little bit more time for something like that to be released. So with that, I want to say thank you for entertaining me for a little bit. And I think we have 10 minutes or so for some questions. I think the room is small enough. I think there may be a mic, but I can take maybe a couple of questions if you have any related to this presentation. I'm not going to be able to answer whether Amazon's going to go into insurance or banking. If you could just keep it constrained to this presentation, that'd be great.
Hello, hello. Yeah. All right, good morning. So just in terms of the document review process, so that is a 2 pizza team size group that does it, so about 10 people?
I see. So the review process can take many forms. So it could be starting with just reviewing with your colleagues. So the way it works typically is the protocol is you do not send the document out beforehand. You actually read the document in the meeting because it can be very difficult to read all of that beforehand. At the leadership team level, at the highest levels that I've participated in, it's Andy, our CEO, and a number of his directs reading the document together. So the 2 pizza team concept is really more organized around delivering of those products and services as opposed to the review process.
Okay, so, and then do documents then get escalated to get to a final product then, or?
Yeah, so there's a couple things to comment on that. One is Amazon has an escalation culture. So basically it means that, let's say you have this idea and it gets kind of blocked by your manager. It is expected and encouraged for you to go skip level your manager and then take that to a higher level. So that's kind of one aspect. And of course, you eventually do have to get to a team, a decision maker who can actually allocate those resources. So we do have a planning process, but then there are also mechanisms that we have to be able to release resources. But typically the way it works is like, I've got this great idea, I want 20 people, and it's like, great, you get 2. And then you can get started, and then you need to prove, and then you need to grow. So that's usually kind of how it works.
Sorry, and just one last question. So when you're, when someone has that idea and they've fully documented it, can anyone call that meeting? Or
yes.
Is there like a standard time where everyone brings their ideas, or is it like, document on demand?
Yeah, it's a good question. My understanding is there's no like formal like process or track. There are certain, because it's happening all the time. We don't like have these seasons. So we do have a planning process, an annual planning process, just like any company where we think about the bigger picture. But the actual PRFAQ reviews, from my understanding, are happening kind of all of the time. There is I like to call it running of the gauntlet. So what ends up happening is as you review these documents with colleagues and peers and others, and as you run it up the organization, you never get it right in the first go. I heard anecdotally when Andy wrote the PRFAQ for AWS, it took him like 30 or 40 revisions before it got to muster. And so what ends up sort of happening, I didn't mention this before, but like maybe someone asks you a question that you didn't consider in the FAQ section. What sometimes will happen is you'll still stick that question in. You may not know the answer to it, but it's sort of recognizing that you've addressed that person's concern. And then it just gets better and better and sort of battle tested to the point where you finally get to a review. I remember as a customer reviewing actually PRFAQs. Accenture was a pretty big consumer of AWS. And so oftentimes we would get PRFAQs that we would review. And in many cases, it would be like, okay, why don't we go to ask a customer? Let's just go straight to the source. Would they be interested in this thing? And I think the thing that I reviewed never saw the light of day. Because I basically was like, this is a horrible idea, I'll never buy this. So yeah, so that happens too. I think there was a question back there in the.
I'm coming. Getting my workout in.
Certainly appreciate your presentation this morning. John Winfrey with Merit Network. We're a nonprofit here in Michigan. And I work for a number of companies, as you can tell. But one of the things I see is that sometimes they'll come up with a solution looking for a problem instead of a problem looking for a solution. Are there any books or processes that you could recommend that we could take a look at, not only here but other places, to avoid that, because it's a product thing and we need to get it right the first time and spend our resources accordingly?
Yeah, so what I'll say is that we, if you happen to be an AWS customer, we do actually take people through this working backwards process. So we'll kind of do a workshop, we'll go through some more kind of basic design thinking kind of exercises, which are not unique to Amazon, but will help resolve to a PRFAQ doc. I'll have to get back to you if you want to give me your card about what's kind of more publicly available. Certainly this is not like, this is pretty well-known kind of process. And then the other thing that I will say is that perhaps more importantly to the point you made was just this idea of like, at least for us, we will not write a line of code. We will not do anything without that press release, because we've had it happen before. In fact, there was an employee all-hands meeting not that long ago where a question was asked to Jeff, like, is this PRFAQ process required? Because it's a lot of work. And Jeff's reaction was basically, I understand it's a lot of work, but if you do it right, it'll actually save more work on the back end. And if you know of a better way, then please let us know. Otherwise, you have to at least give it a shot. So doesn't probably directly answer your question. We are doing more, I would say, I don't think this is like confidential, to try to expose more and more people to this process, because it does appear to resonate with a number of folks. And if you've been, I know I don't look like I've been in IT that long, because sometimes I'll still get carded. Yeah, I remember I had like I had an Asian driver, and I told him I had a high schooler, and he almost like drove off the side of the road because he was shocked. But yeah, if you've been around in IT for a long time, you know that some of the ways that we've done things aren't always the best way in terms of allocating resources and investment. So I think perhaps we'll just close with that. Again, thank you so much for having me here today, and happy to take some questions afterwards. Thank you very much.